I was just saying that some of the things, there's a lot of stuff that came out because it's such a large subject. And one thing in particular was to sort of learn what great stuff's already going on in organisations in terms of dealing with equality and mechanisms that people have got in place and share them about. So if somebody's doing a great job, make sure that everybody understands what that is and how they're doing it. And David mentioned that perhaps the TMF could help with that with the links that they have with organisations already. There was a totally excellent point about things like everybody who runs a venue should spend a day in a wheelchair. And that has just completely resonated with me. And I'm like, yes, there should be lots of like small projects where people actually get to really understand what it's like to step into the life of somebody else. And I think that very much comes back down to that whole speaking directly to people who have different things that they're dealing with in their lives, to learn directly from them and to understand where they're coming from. We thought that it would be great to have a lot more discussion and a lot more focused discussion about really specific areas, because it was very hard to take on a wide discussion, and we kind of ended up going down lots of different avenues. But every single one of those is incredibly important, and we should spend time having a really good discussion and probably a really good rant about lots of different parts of that. And I guess one other thing. Well, there was one great thing that was get out of your own bubble, which I thought was marvelous, and to not to be scared to ask people about themselves, and I guess to be open if people do ask you about yourself, to try and understand why they're asking and to give them kind of a constructive and helpful way of working things out. I think certainly I've been curious about stuff in the past and not quite known how to ask people about what it is that they're dealing with. And sometimes you can be shot down for asking stuff and be told, well, how dare you not understand? And I think that can be quite hard if you're trying to put yourself on the line, I think, to understand what might be difficult about somebody else's life, or just different in any way. So yeah, don't be scared about asking people questions. And if you're asked questions, try and just be patient while somebody's randomly trying to learn about you. I guess. Yeah, that's what I've got so far.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jen. I'm furiously scribbling away here. Um, so yeah, but would it be possible to? I think your presentation was it written? Down?
Yeah, I've got more stuff noted down, so I can send that
Yeah,
on.
that'd be great. Yeah. Um, so Malcolm, anything that emerged for
Yeah,
you?
yeah, absolutely. A lot of the discussion that we had was focused around on how we can take the idea of an alternative to the UBI, which was the job guarantee, and how we can shape policies and structures around that. How can we put tangible, specific things in place to make that a reality, to fit what is required for traditional musicians and traditional culture and heritage? How you can take the general idea of the job guarantee, which is something that's sort of in the heterodox economic canon, and how you can actually use that in the world of traditional music. And it's specifically how it can bridge the gap between what would be an industry standard job guarantee scheme and what would help traditional musicians who are mainly in the self-employed category. There was felt to be a bit of a gap there. It's also about how to actually make people realize that there is value in what's happening in the traditional music world, in preserving our cultural heritage. And I was really fascinated with what Steve had to say on all the archiving and the amount of effort that has to go into maintaining that. And also the fact that in Ireland, they are employing traditional musicians at the Traditional Music Archive. And that is really the sort of thing that the job guarantee could really help with. But you have to have an administration in government who is actually going to support all that. But it's how it's all marketed, how the education system handles it, so that we're not just bombarded with mainstream media, mainstream education, mainstream entertainment. Little Mix was brought up and things like that. We value things that we're brought up with and considered to be norms. So if that is part of education and it's much more prominent in people's lives, then we'll become much more used to it. We'll accept that, yeah, you know, traditional music is a part of everything we do. So there's things about enhancing its prominence, enhancing people's concept of its value to society. The specific answer to the pay for question, which Steve brought up in his breakout, yeah, the answer to that is whatever is available for sale in the country, the government can afford. Money is not the object. The money can be created just like that for whatever they need it for. The question is, have you got the resources to spend it on? And it's quite clear from Steve's talk, yeah, there is just so much there waiting to be done that needs to be done. And there are people that are around that could be employed to do all that. What we lack is a government that's in power that says, yes, we value traditional culture, put some money into it to make it a reality. So there's all sorts of other things around those areas that came up, but those are the main points that I've taken away from it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Malcolm. That's really useful. Jim. You're muted, Jim. Yep.
There was no huge conclusion, except for perhaps we do need a job guarantee scheme. I think that it's going to be very hard to claw back what is now in the sort of global, the globalized music business domain in terms of our royalties. I think one thing maybe that people thought was if we were going to offer some sort of streaming service, that somehow or other we should be offering something to people, to consumers that they weren't getting. And that's maybe something to put our mind to. Everything's very media led in terms of, you know, what it is, and single tracks being downloaded and put into playlists. It's becoming a hard world for us, and I think with no live music to promote the idea that our music is a marketing tool, which is something we've all kind of got used to. This idea since 2003 or 4 onwards, we've had to get used to this idea that our music is simply a marketing tool for us. And now we can't do the work, so that marketing tool kind of becomes redundant as a marketing tool. And so what is it that we record music for but to communicate? And but we do have to monetize it somehow. I think the idea that the government step in, I think it's a similar thing to what Malcolm was talking about. If we had a government that was sympathetic to the arts and didn't wait 5 months to dish out the emergency funding that artists need, we would be perhaps in a better position in terms of our needs as artists and musicians. And I think that goes right across the arts, not just in the traditional arts. Tricky times.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, very salutary thoughts. Donald?
So I think out of both the wee discussion groups we had, there was a recognition that there was a kind of both and phase coming, in which we hope we're just gradually going to get back to some live options, but that digital avenues are going to remain part of the mix. And in that regard, the key thing that came out, I think, was that musicians are going to need support to move forward with that, and venues are going to need some support, including upping the skills and technical level of small scale venues, so as they've got the capacity to help people to deliver on that kind of both and options in the for at least a transitional period, and maybe for some significant time. The final thing was, I just had because I kept missing out. I had this scary moment when they said, "You are now Steve. You are moving to Steve," and I thought, "Oh my God, I don't think that will work. I have to be Steve Byrne." But the only thing that it's all about transformation, isn't it? But the part, I just had an archive thing to say as well. I think that the moment to really, if we're going to have a thriving sort of ICH national policy and whatever, we've got to address having a proper traditional music archive. I think it's absolutely essential. But I think, you know, we shouldn't leave the dance people out of this. That I hear exactly the same arguments from the traditional dance community that has much less resource around archive and is intimately connected with the music scene. So I would just put in a wee plea that you know, a traditional music archive doesn't neglect the dance dimension. I think those were the main points. It was a very encouraging discussion, lots of good ideas from people, and I think people have been very resourceful, and we can go on supporting each other. But we need to lobby for some of these good ideas as we move forward.
Yeah. And finally, Steve.
Thanks, Dave. So broad agreement that it sounds like a you know, a positive idea, something that there seems to be a need for. People want to know where to put their stuff. In fact, some people wanted an address straight away at the start of the discussion. But there certainly is more groundwork to be done. You know, my discussion was really about provoking thought and conversation. Discussion needs to be had about the structure and the relationships, potentially the relationship with academia, whether that would be sort of very formal or whether it would be more of an advisory role. Potential to have a pilot scoping really for the breadth of collections. I think that's the thing that struck me as I came out of it, is that, you know, we need to really work out the length and breadth of the thing before we would jump into it, to actually do an initial call as part of a pilot to see the breadth of potential collections of material that are out there. There were some other ideas really about, you know, Jen talked quite enthusiastically. She felt that musicians, if there was a dedicated archive for our sector, that musicians would potentially sign up to a kind of supportive subscription, you know, a friends scheme or a fellowship scheme, knowing that their own creative output was also being safeguarded as well as that of generations gone before. And that as part of the discussions moving forward, that there should really be some kind of dialogue mechanism to just kind of refer back to this kind of group to seek further support and to just run ideas past and that sort of thing. So even something as simple as an initial mailing list to just let people know how the developments are moving along and what ideas there are out there. One other aspect that was highlighted was the need for video to be included. I did my passing mention of that, and this probably plays into the dance side of things too. Originally, the idea came, or I've been advocating the idea since the 2015 report I wrote for Tracks about its relationship with archiving, and that looked at a wider traditional arts archive. So there's potential to look at that, no problem at all. The video side of things, I'm in discussions just now with the Elphinstone about exactly that, in terms of looking at video material for the trad scene. I think I mentioned this in one discussion, but not the other. And so it's just to flag that that's also something that's happening, and there'll be some movement in that regard too over the next wee while. It will all form part of the same thing in the longer term, but essentially, I think some groundwork to establish the parameters going forward and what relationships we would need to build or to extend.